Hey everyone, Irene Lyon here. Welcome to this entire world of nervous system health and healing. And today I have a special guest, one of our students from SmartBody SmartMind. This is my online program. If you don't know what that is, we will link that near here so you can check that out. Her name is Dani. She's a mom of twins. She lives in Australia. And I wanted to have her on to talk about her journey doing this work, learning about the nervous system, learning about regulation at this somatic level, this nervous system level, why it's so important. I get so many questions from parents and people who work with kids saying, can these children, can these teenagers do your programs? And the overarching answer is no, they cannot. My programs are meant for adult learning. But what we talk about is how her understanding of herself and nervous system physiology is shifting how she is with her daughters, how she helps them, how she listens to them. And we also get into the fact that you can't always have a trick or a technique for a certain emotion. It comes down to that attunement and that connection with the kid, with the child, with the teen, with the infant. And that's what we really want to get to here, is not how we can biohack this element of connecting with our kids and helping them, but how can we really restore regulation and really this organic intelligence into our body so that we can be intelligent with others around us. Dani is very clear in this talk that she has not done her healing, just as I and all of us are continuing on a path of growing more capacity and more regulation. So we talk about this, that this is not a quick fix. This is an ongoing lifestyle. And we just have a general conversation about her being a mom, doing this work, and the ups and downs of this journey. So enjoy this conversation. And like I said, all links to all of my things are near this video, and enjoy. Welcome to a chat here with Dani. Dani is one of our students from, I think, both of our programs, SmartBody
Yep,
SmartMind and the 21 Day. And we connected, it was quite a while ago,
it was.
on social media, I believe.
Yep, through Instagram.
And so I wanted to just get your story, like what brought you to seeking out this work, this nervous system work. And I know that you've got some kiddos that have greatly been impacted in positive ways by your own regulation. So tell us your story, Dani,
Yeah.
and what led you here.
I first heard about your work through your interview with Sarah Kleiner, which I think a lot of people have found you through there too. And I kind of hit the ground running because it was exactly what I was looking for at the time. I'd done a ton of therapy and had gains for sure, but kept sort of hitting up against a brick wall when it came to how do I implement changes? I can understand all of what's happening. I could tell anybody where things were coming from, why I was, making decisions I was, or why my life was the way it was. Knew all of it down to a T, but facilitating some kind of actual um, shift
Mm-hmm.
in it, I wasn't. And when you were interviewed and then I started looking at your resources, it was like, this is it. This is what I was trying to find. This is the mechanism by which I could help with this stuff. And so I began first with the free resources. I think I did that in one day. I did the 3-part healing series, and then just went straight into the 21-day tune up, and like I couldn't get enough. It was insatiable. I was like, oh my gosh. So I was just listening to all of the different YouTube interviews, videos, resources. And during that 21-day tune up, the biggest shift that I found, and it sounds kind of like not a big deal, but my presence in the moments, especially with my kids, was night and day. And I hadn't realized, I mean, I've heard a lot about being present and we should be present, be in the moment. And all of that made sense again, cerebrally. But until I did that first orienting exercise, I was like, oh, this is what presence is. Because I had done meditation a lot many years before and had a glimpse of it, but it didn't feel the same. This was different. It was much more presence in a conscious way rather than sort of checking out and bypassing, as you say. So that was the first time I've really felt that I dropped into a feeling and an experience of presence, which I have realized in a huge way is what's been so hard about parenting for me.
Right.
Is not being present.
Not being present. I want to take you back that time. I do want to get into your parenting journey because that was a big part of our connection.
Yes.
As you know, and many of my students hear this, and parents are always looking for ways to help their children. Not all parents, but many parents are looking for ways to help their kiddos. And they know that they're having, we call it in the world, anxiety, depression, ADD, all these kind of keywords that just are being thrown out all around for the kids. So I want to talk about them and how they've shifted, and you've changed your interaction with them.
Yeah.
But do you remember, Dani, when you did that orienting exercise? Because that seems to be for many people who've had a history of doing mind body. Because if I believe you're a Pilates instructor,
Yeah.
correct?
And before that, I was a dancer. So the body, I knew my body. I was very connected to my body. Yeah.
So what was, as you said, it felt like there was a presence that shifted. I know this was a while ago, but if you were to kind of fall back into that memory, what was it that was different for you?
I think the best way to explain it, the way that you guide them, and I still find I need the guidance. It's sort of a container that allows me to not go into control in a way. So having that guidance of checking in with physically how you felt in the space, as well as what was outside there, as well as what my breathing felt like. And that was huge, noticing my breath rather than controlling my breath, because Pilates is very controlled around breathing, as is when you're on stage dancing and performing. So for the first time, actually just noticing my breath and not changing it was huge. And so that feeling of presence was a curiosity and a noticing, as opposed to a forcing feeling
Yeah.
of some concept that I did understand. I understood what it meant to be present, be in the moment. But I was never really being that. And in orienting, I felt like I was actually being present.
Thank you.
Mm.
I often wonder how many people do feel or think, there I'll go, think that they're in that presence, but,
Yeah.
and it's not their fault, as you know, it's just what we've been taught, but they're really actually quite disconnected from the body for the most part.
Yes. I can say for myself, absolutely. And I think that guidance and that cueing that I believe you're a master at when it comes to the orienting, just when I might be thinking too much, you draw me into just notice your breath, or just see now where your gaze is taking you, whatever it might be that you're cueing. It was just enough to keep me from checking out or going off track.
Yeah. And you mentioned before we hit record that the element of dissociating, I can't say it today, dissociating was something or is something that you've been working with and you're still working with. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I don't think I realized. I knew I could dissociate very easily, but I would have likened that to when I needed to go into shutdown and just like put the television off and on rather, and get mindless. But through the work with you, I have certainly realized that my thinking is actually a mechanism of dissociation for me. So when I'm feeling a sensation, I suppress that, go straight into my head and start analyzing it. And I think I'm processing, and I've realized, no, I'm actually dissociating when I'm starting to think too much. So the orienting has been instrumental with that, because it doesn't give me too much time to go into thinking, but recognizing that thinking for me is dissociation. Overthinking, some of the thinking is good,
Of
But
course.
when it goes into that overriding, actually sitting with the sensation that I'm feeling, um, then I know I'm dissociating. So it's not even that's the shift has happened in me being aware of that more
Yeah.
and now having some tools to go, okay, that's what I'm doing, just orient. And so just follow my impulse, whatever it might be. I have those sort of go tos, one, to be aware of it, and then secondly, what do I do then when I'm
Right.
starting to do that overthinking?
Great. So you're catching yourself being pulled out of your
Yes.
body, just to repeat what you said. And your higher brain is actually helping you come back to your somatic system.
Yeah,
Isn't
yeah.
that interesting?
So interesting because I really did think, because I am very connected to my body and I always have been, but this is a very different level of connection to my body. I'm
Mm.
much more aware and much more, it's subtle yet paradoxically very overt, that I'm realizing that physical disconnection that I like to go to feel
Yeah.
safe. Mm.
Tell me about your kids in the way that you want to share. So
Yeah,
have give us the rundown of where they're at and how you've been working with them through you in your parenting journey.
sure. So, just as a little bit of background, the
Hmm.
entire journey from pregnancy through to birth, through to post birth, was all very not the way you would want it to go to set up a great regulated system. So, I have twins and they're about to be 12. So, they were born at the end of 2010. Very high risk pregnancy. I was put into hospital during the pregnancy toward the end. They were born premature, and that was not through going into labour, it was an organised C section.
Mm-hmm.
They were both ripped. I say that sounds very dramatic, but they were both taken straight out, put into separate cribs, and I literally watched them be flipped from front to back and blue while they were trying to get them to breathe. And I remember freaking out saying, "Is that normal? Is that normal?" in the
Mm-hmm.
room. And then they were whisked right away. One of my daughters was meant to be born with, or they had seen on a scan that she had a particular thing that would require surgery immediately. That didn't end up happening, which was a
Good.
godsend. So she was born without that condition. But they were whisked straight to NICU, and I didn't see them for 24 hours. I wasn't allowed down. So my now ex-partner and my mother and his parents were sort of going in, taking videos, bringing them back up to me. And I finally was allowed to go down the next day. And they were hooked up to all the tubes and all the
Yeah.
things. So they didn't get any of that initial co-regulation. It was a very big shock to the system. Um, cut to, 5 weeks in the NICU, they were finally able to come home. And then, it was not the greatest relationship that I was in at the time, so that ended up ending when they were
Mm-hmm.
around 3.5. He's still very much in their life, but um, since then, from toddlers onward, anxiety became a huge thing for both of them, and just not feeling safe in the world at all, like
Mm-hmm.
extreme anxiety. So um, going to preschool was a huge issue. The separation there was just, they could not handle it. Kept getting the information that they'll get used to it. They never did. They got to school. Again, people said they're probably bored. They're quite bright. They need more stimulation. School went from bad to getting worse and worse and worse until last year, which they were in grade 5 at the time. I ended up pulling them out, so they're now homeschooled. Um, so we're still dealing with a lot of emotional eruptions and inability to sort of cope with everyday stressors for them, which involves doing things that are new, going out a lot. They don't love going out. Their social interaction is very overwhelming for them, so they can only take a little bit. But what I've found is all those years in school, since then, and since me starting this work, it kind of coincided. So when they
Yeah.
stopped going to school and then I started the course, it's almost provided this safe space for everything that was underneath to come up. So there's been, in the last year, still a ton of meltdowns and intensity of anxiety and different flavors of OCD and different things that look like certain things, which has been tough. I won't say it hasn't. It's been very triggering. But I've found when I'm able, as my capacity grows and I'm able to just hold space, that gets overused sometimes saying that, but when I can be, if my child's having a meltdown, I can be present and just try to sit with the sensation that I'm having, put it to the side and be like, I'll be back to that, and just keep the space for my child. It seems to be an unraveling of all of those stresses that have been contained in the body. So I'm going with it, and I think what I will notice is that their response feels like they're allowed to have this eruption now, whereas before I was trying to fix it.
Yeah.
And trying to, stop it. Although some moments I've still definitely failed in the moment because I have not been in the place to hold the space. But even where, like the other day, there was a meltdown, and afterward, I could tell sometimes they need to just like decompress and just not do anything. But I could tell there was still this sort of energy in one of their bodies. So we got on the trampoline and we were just jumping and just getting it out. And then she was like, oh, no, I'm tired now. And it wasn't a sort of shut down tiredness. It was like, it's out. Now I need to just be calm. So I find I'm more aware of what their nervous system is doing in those moments, and able to ride the wave, because it is different every time. So the same meltdown may happen, the same trigger, and then this time she doesn't need to jump on the trampoline. She needs to just sit and have a cuddle. Sometimes she needs to write. Sometimes she needs to actually get on the iPad and play a game and just check out. So that awareness as a parent is where I think I've seen the biggest shift.
Thank you. It really is a testament to you being regulated and working on your regulation and with your sensations. And as you are learning, Dani, when you have a sensation, you're not always going to do the same thing to be with it, tame it, soothe it, shift it. And it's the same with the kids, whether they're infants or toddlers or children or teens, as yours are. And that connection, because there might be someone watching this who's very new to this work, just to give a new listener context. When we are born as little ones, and we have, from what you said, there was a stressful pregnancy, so there was a lot of, most likely, we're going to assume, stress chemistry in your system when they were in you, developing. So we know that is a stress and a trauma, as you learned.
Yeah.
And then it sounds like the birth had its own fears. Anything with surgery would. So then there's that piece, right? And as you mentioned, your relationship was strained with your spouse, your partner. And so there's another little piece. And then they come out, and thank God they're fine, but they're handled in a way that really we don't want to unless it's absolutely necessary. But from what we've learned, I know, again, granted it's safe, is that connection with mama is important.
Yeah.
That didn't happen, and I know you've processed a lot of this, and so you're making up for lost time.
Yeah.
Even though that time was 24 hours, but also you mentioned 6 weeks.
Yeah, five, but yes, yeah.
And that's a lot of time in a baby's life.
Yeah.
Right? And that, again, for the listeners, when we're that little, and you know this, everything is somatic. Everything is sensation. It's not necessarily emotion.
Yeah.
Because at that young age and in utero, the emotions haven't become really developed. There's fear, as you know. There's fight, flight, and freeze. Hunger might be there depending on where they're at. And so then fast forward to teenage years, children years, intense emotions can't be explained.
Yeah.
And to have a parent, as you have learned, to learn about this and see that they're not trying to misbehave,
Mm.
which often is the case, they're just expressing their unresolved stress physiology from a very challenging early time.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's really hard to, I still struggle and I have to like process all the time because it's very hard to separate the sensations that are coming up versus behavior. Because I loved the interview that you and Seth did on, you know, childhood and parenting and stuff, because it is a fine line. I find I'm still trying to figure out that line between allowing and honing and refining behavior, because I know it needs to come out, but sometimes, wow, it's like it's difficult, and I have
It
to then also deal with my own sensations and stress coming up through that.
exactly, and the what you just mentioned was a talk I did with my husband in September of 2022.
Mm-hmm.
We'll link it near here. It's titled "The Ill Effects of Dysregulated Parenting." And Seth was that kiddo that was
Yeah,
born into an NICU and had a mama that was very stressed when she was carrying, and that creates, some pretty severe PTSD. And we
yeah,
don't think that that's connected to post-traumatic stress because we connect that with war and big traumas. But
yeah,
this is just as big for a little person as a war zone for a
yeah,
big person.
yeah,
You
absolutely.
had Go ahead, please.
No, I was just going to say it's those months, years, and development. That's like the laying of the foundation, and so I do feel like I'm trying to make up for lost time, and better late than never, I guess. But it's
Hmm.
laying those blocks, and it's slow and it's steady, and it's not always just like, oh yeah, it's all like 1 + 1 is 2. It's forward, back, and there's this vacillation happening, and it does take nuance to ride those waves so that that foundation can be laid. And I'm still in the trenches with it. I'm by no means, yes, we've laid the foundation, but I feel like I've got these years left before they're
Yes.
adults to make any kind of impact on that level that wasn't gotten in those really crucial times early on.
Yeah, and the other mention I was going to bring in, when you said that fine line between allowing their systems to express that survival physiology as we know needs to happen, also containing it with safety and
Yes.
support. But then also, now that they are older and you're having to figure out the teaching of right from wrong
Yeah.
and taking care of things and their space,
Yeah.
it's a challenge. So
It
I
is
just
a
want to.
challenge because I think too that there's so much guilt that when they've had a meltdown, they know I don't want to behave like that. They've articulated that themselves. And so
Hmm.
there's a level of guilt and shame around the behavior in themselves.
Hmm.
So there's a fine line there too, to not, break their sense of self and say, yeah, it's bad, but refining and allowing. And it feels like that's where the course has helped in the education portion, because I'm allowing myself to teach them in, you know, drop form what they can understand, to know where that's coming from. And they do understand, oh, this is, it has to come out. It doesn't mean I'm bad. So
Hmm.
that's an important part of it too, is helping them understand what's happening. And I'm granted, my kids are nearly 12; they can understand. You can tell a toddler maybe, but um, that's been a big piece, is trying to help them understand why there's these big eruptions that they can't quite cope with.
So that's great to hear that they're at that age where they can understand. And it sounds like they're taking in little bits of information with some fairly decent awareness.
Definitely, yeah. I think you touch on even the touch therapy stuff, which we do as part of the course, and I definitely um, that's been helpful with a hot water bottle sometimes on their back for kidneys. Sometimes they don't want that, but one of my children in particular, I think she gets quite calmed by that. So she's actually asked herself sometimes, can I have a hot water bottle for my kidneys? And so
Great.
there's a level of understanding.
That's great. And that's often what's asked, Dani. Parents will ask, can my kids do the course?
Right.
And personally, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because they're at that age where they are going to school, learning things. I personally say no, not directly,
Mm,
because it really is more adult learning
yeah.
and there's bigger chunks. Um, so I'd love to hear your perspective on that. And you've already mentioned it, but you're finding ways, as you said, to drop the information. So you're having to be creative. Would you
Yes.
agree?
Absolutely. I can even, and I agree that I don't think my kids could sit down and listen to an orienting exercise. So I don't think it's actually for them. It's almost like, we always hear the whole analogy of putting your mask on first. It gets, used so much. We all know that. No one does it. But this sort of gives you permission to be like, no, kids, don't do this. This is for you. You do it, and you'll find ways. And I have found ways. There was, yes, in teaching them a little bit, like, try to relax that, or even when one of my children gets quite a sensitive stomach. So I've used a little bit of the pendulation with her.
Yeah,
So feel that tummy, and now just focus on your foot, and now go back to your tummy. And so
right.
little things like that come in. But one of my daughters, her expression of stress is anger. And I've only done this one time with her, but I saw a shift in her as she did it. So she started to get mad about something. And I interlaced my fingers with her. I said, grab my hands. And I was just pushing back and forth with her while she was talking to me about why she was angry. And it was just an instinct to do that. And then, she finished talking, but it was more that she was like, okay, yeah, I'm done with that now. And then
Hmm.
it came up another couple months later that she got angry, and I went, interlace my hands, and she didn't want to. And I was like, oh, that's
Mm.
not working now. And I forced her to do it at first. I was like, no, come on, come on. And we were doing it, and I was like, this isn't working now. So my sensitivity is stronger through the work to go, that's not appropriate for now. Yes, the expression is the same. It's she's angry. That worked last time. It's not working now. So you get a little bit better at navigating what's needed, and sometimes I miss the mark completely. Um, but yeah, little things just start to enter in where you're like, let me try that.
Yeah, that's great. And that's a good indication of how something that's expressing behaviorally or emotionally, we can't always know as say the therapist or the parent or the partner what that person needs,
Mm,
but we can kind of attune and have curiosity as opposed to trying to impose, I need you to do this.
right.
And it sounds like your kiddos, your daughters they feel safe enough to say, I don't want that,
Yeah, definitely.
which is huge.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where the fine line is. That sometimes, I'm like, I'm the mum still. Like,
Yes.
yeah.
Uh, One of the things that we, again, talked about before we pressed record was your personal journey.
Right.
So it really sounds like, Dani, you're on a good trajectory with your daughters, and thank goodness that you have the capacity and the ability to have them at home
Yeah.
and school them, which isn't always the case
No.
for parents. So that's very fortunate. But what about yourself? What was going on in your system, even pre-birth, pre-kids,
Yeah.
that that was from your potential early trauma from your childhood, and
Yeah.
even birth? I'm not sure if you have any of your own stories
I
around that.
don't know with my birth that much, to be honest, that there was anything that stood out as, an ACE or an early childhood adverse experience.
Hmm.
But when I was 11, I did lose my stepdad, who was I had my dad and was in relationship with him as well, but lived with my stepdad and my mother. And he was, one of the, um, you know, beautiful step parents. He was,
Mm.
an amazing human being, and he passed away when I was 11. So in retrospect, that was definitely a big, huge, cog in the wheel of the flow
Yeah.
of life and my regulation, and I certainly can see how that played out. In thinking back, I kind of probably went into a bit of shock, and there was a level of dissociation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I was a dancer as a kid, so threw myself more into that. But it was forced as opposed to before. It hadn't been. It was a love of my life, and I'd
Mm-hmm.
still loved to dance, but it was just going through the motions. There was something lost in losing him in
Of
my system
course.
for sure. And then when I was 20, I was in a very abusive relationship with someone, and that lasted about 2.5 years. Um, and it was abusive on all levels and very, um, very violent.
Mm-hmm.
And even once I left that, the um, disordered nature of it all was still very present because I was still in contact and still having interactions with that person, um, going to similar classes as him. We were both in the entertainment world, so would see him and that sort of thing. So I was still engaging and thinking that was fine. And it wasn't probably until after we'd broken up, it was another 4 or 5 years after that that I went into, like, I was starting to have panic attacks and was just very depressed and didn't really feel like I had much of a will to live, and did start seeing a therapist and was at that time diagnosed with complex PTSD and depression. And at the time, the therapist, was suggesting that I would need medication, um, which I never ended up following through with. And since then, I've definitely gone in and out of talk therapy, and it has been helpful. I've used some other modalities as well, more on a spiritual sense, that have been instrumental in getting me through certain things and healing certain aspects of that connection.
Mm-hmm.
But my nervous system was still completely shot. And
Yeah.
I would sort of muscle through and still would get through, but there was a sense of non purpose, I guess, or lack of purpose. And definitely like just sort of watching the world from a perspective that I was kind of seeing it but wasn't really in it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I can now turn that I was definitely in functional freeze. And I still feel like I'm just unwinding that through this work. Um, and it is a slow and steady process, but definitely that unfreezing is happening.
Yeah.
Mm,
That's great.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's a big trauma,
Mm,
losing a parent, even if they're a step parent.
yeah.
But as you said, he was a support, a safety.
Massive. Yeah.
And so that we know that that is technically an ace. You know, the death of a, if my memory serves, and it doesn't have to be your biological parent, right?
Right.
So that makes sense. Again, for those new here who might not see that as a big shock trauma,
Mm,
when you're that young and you have a resource, a safe haven, a secure attachment,
yeah.
and then they're gone, and it sounds like it was rather shocking
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
quickly, um, it makes sense that you threw yourself into dance. But as you said, you were most likely that was the start, perhaps, of some of the functional freeze.
Totally. I can I can look back and see that it absolutely was. Yeah.
Yeah, and then again, just to follow that path, and this is no one's fault, but this is the nervous system, as you've learned, that could be, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, what led you into an abusive relationship because you didn't have the spidey senses that were
No.
accurate.
No. And even when I did, I ignored them because there were certainly moments where I was like, okay, no, and no, yeah, I had no boundaries,
Exactly.
and that probably is something through this work that I'm slowly starting to develop a sense of agency
Mm-hmm.
that I, at 44 years of age,
Yeah.
go, oh my God, I've never had that. I've always looked to an outside source for validation or for information or for, considering anything outside of myself as more the authority, and in the process abandoning myself. So
Mm-hmm.
following impulses, what? I was following my impulses. I was going with whatever, like it was like,
Yeah.
a puppy's attention, like, oh, there's the ball, oh, there's the thing. It was all outside of myself. There was no agency from within.
Mm-hmm.
And again, that's not fully healed, but I'm much more aware of when I'm going, oh, no, that doesn't feel right, or this boundary needs to be put in place now that wasn't there before. That's this whole year has been very much about that because of the
Yeah.
work. So,
Awesome.
mm,
Thank you.
mm.
Any other little notes, big notes, final notes that you want to share? I know that your journey continues, and this is a really important part of these conversations with students of these courses is this isn't just you don't go for 2 months and then stop. This is an ongoing journey and it improves as you go along.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not without, like I think you mentioned this with your interview with Seth, your husband, as well. It's not that, it took me 7 years to get here. In that 7 years, I'm sure there's all of these different things. I'm a year in, and the changes are, like I said, paradoxically profound and subtle. But I also am very aware of how far I've still got to go. But it doesn't seem like, oh my God, it's like all the way over there. It feels like I again have finally I'm experiencing the understanding I had of it's a journey. I'm actually doing that now with comfort, not like angst about, oh, it's going to take so and so long to
Yeah.
get there. It is working and it's living and it's breathing as I'm seeing improvements. And it doesn't mean that I don't have, days where I do slip back in, but I'm aware of it. So I can look at it as an opportunity, um, which when you're on the other side of that and you're in the depths of stuff and you don't have the tools, people saying it's an opportunity, look at it, it can seem like I'm being bypassy. I don't
Mm-hmm.
mean it like that. It actually does become um, opportunities for unleashing some of that stuff that does keep you stuck, and it's um, finally feels like you sort of, I'm on a trajectory towards healing that.
Thank you. And what it sounds like, I'm just going to reflect what you said. Now that you are in the present moment and you're not in the same survival stress loops that you once were, and you can notice when you are in them,
Mm.
I often think, and I'd love to hear what you think about this, that that is what makes it feel less of a, as you said, this burden of, oh my goodness, this is going to take forever. But when you're in the present moment, it really is, as cliche as that sounds, the present moment
Yeah,
in full embodiment and connected to the environment. And there's kind of like an edge that's taken off, or a sting, or an urgency that shifts. Does that make sense?
yeah, it does, and that's so true. That edge is not the same. It's not as prickly. It's not as daunting or heavy. It doesn't sit the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, definitely agree with that.
Thank you.
Mm.
Well, what I'm thinking is we keep in touch and we do another check-in a year
I would love to.
when your kiddos are 13.
Yeah. Yeah,
And just see how things are going. So hopefully you're up for that.
absolutely.
And we'll stay in touch. And thank you so much for your time and your work and just being a good mom.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dani.
Thanks, Irene.